From the upcoming book, We Chose Play, Raising an Autistic Child to Thrive and Feel Understood. From Chapter 2. The occupational therapist helped us understand our child's sensory system and what his nervous system required to stay regulated. Our son needed movement. However, as Dr. Stanley Greenspan and his colleagues frequently emphasized, sensory systems do not operate in isolation. It's important to consider the sensory, motor, and emotional systems together. This means that since our son loved and required movement to feel grounded and process sensory information from his environment, we would engage him while he was on a swing, create running games where we would crash into a pillow or mat, or walk through sand together, all while interacting, commenting, and laughing. Interacting while moving helped his brain develop the necessary pathways to integrate and coordinate his movements as his visual system processed visual stimuli while he ran, moved up and down, or rocked, for example. When he swung and crashed into us with his feet, his proprioceptive system, the system that helps him understand where his body parts are and how they relate to space, such as whether he can fit into a toy box or if his body is too big, would receive the input he needed to gauge how much force he needed to apply in order to reach us with each swing. These experiences, paired with emotional interaction, made the activities emotionally meaningful as we helped him make sense of what we were doing together.
All of Affect Autism's podcasts are produced and edited by Daria Brown. Please note that the views expressed during all episodes are solely those of the individuals involved, do not constitute educational or medical advice, and do not necessarily reflect the views of Affect Autism, Daria Brown, nor ICDL and associated parties. Listeners should consult with professionals familiar with their individual circumstances for specific support.
You're listening to the We Chose Play podcast from Affect Autism, where affect is the #1 tool we use in supporting development through playful interactions.
Hello, Floortimers! This week I have 2 returning guests and a new guest. We have Mary Beth Crawford, who is a licensed physical therapist and a DIRFloortime expert training leader. She founded Baby Steps Therapy in 2008. She regularly provides lectures and in-service training to numerous parent groups, medical professionals, and allied health groups on the foundations of motor development and on her unique approach to pediatric physical therapy. Welcome back, Mary Beth. We have returning guest, DIRFloortime expert training leader, Manaz Makbul. She is a speech-language pathologist in Pennsylvania, also working with Mary Beth Crawford at Baby Steps. She also teaches certificate courses for ICDL, the International Council on Development and Learning, as does Mary Beth, and has taught courses and mentored internationally, including in Pakistan and Bulgaria. And a new guest, welcome Suzanne Gabriel. She is an occupational therapist and DIRFloortime advanced practitioner. She's dedicated to bringing awareness and celebration for all children's unique individual profiles. She has in-service training and lectures on the importance of the synchrony of sensory, motor, and social-emotional development, as we heard Mary Beth talk about in our last podcast, as it relates to occupational therapy and the DIRFloortime approach. She has advanced training in sensory integration and is certified in the evaluation in the Ayers Sensory Integration, EASI. Some of her other certifications include Safe Sound Protocol, that's the polyvagal theory one, rhythmic movement training, so that's all the reflex integration and stuff like that, tactile integration from the MNRI, which maybe she'll tell us what that is, and primitive reflex evaluation and integration, and ocular motor differences in treatment, which again, Mary Beth talked about a bit last time. And she's a certified educator of infant massage and interactive metronome, which I have sitting on my shelf for the past 7 years that I've been supposed to use with my son, and I still haven't yet. But I will get to it. So today we are talking about how these guys have this collaborative approach in their clinic. It's a strength-based studio for therapies using the DIRFloortime approach, and Baby Steps truly embodies a true DIRFloortime collaborative. So I can't wait to dive into this topic. Mary Beth.
You know, for me, when I started Baby Steps, the entire mission was to bring Floortime and sync up sensory affect motor as the underpinning of global development, which everybody who's listened to me speak knows that's sort of my passion, with the intention of and thinking about how critical other people are in kind of bringing to light our approach, like just really when I started it, it was great, but I really inherently knew I needed to work with people that I value, people that I trust, people who are going to challenge my thoughts and think a little bit differently and create a real reciprocity for myself. And over the years, I think first Susie and I started working together.
Like about over 5 years ago.
Mhm.
You know, we met a long time ago.
Yes.
We met at a Total Approach with Maud LaRue.
Right.
And then life happened and we worked in various settings and she started Baby Steps and
We had
still...
3 kids the same year.
Yes.
Right.
And then about 5 years ago, I started my own business, and through many talks, we decided to partner and bring occupational therapy to Baby Steps, and that was like the birth of our collaboration. And then
I happened. So about 3.5 years ago, I also, saw these two amazing women in this amazing Floortime clinic and thought, Mary Beth, really realized that, the best way to provide floor time to all of our kiddos is to add the speech and language component as well. So I joined forces with these two amazing women. And so we're not only a floor time clinic for the kids we work with, but we're a floor time clinic for each other. So we provide that level of safety for each other. We co-regulate each other. So it is a very complete model in how we support each other and how we're there for one another as well. And that's why this clinic is as amazing as it is.
I think a part of being a true collaboration is creating enough space for regular discussion about all of our mutual cases and regular communication and relationships that each of us have with the clients, each of us have with the client's parents, and each of us have with one another. So because of the layered and nuanced model that we provide, often what we found is we can provide the most quality when we keep our team at this trio, basically. That the more, not that we're not trying to grow, because we are, but also as we grow and expand, how can we maintain the integrity of the real collaboration, the regularity of meeting, and the critical importance of the communication.
So those meetings are really key to why things work.
You guys consider it reflective practice and reflective supervision, or do you get reflective supervision from someone else? Because I've done a podcast with OT Andrew Klein on reflective practice, and then with Jerry Costa some time ago about his whole idea of how we train and that whole idea of formation of professionals, and he talked a lot about that reflective piece, and it seems like that's what you guys are talking about here.
Absolutely, yes. I think each of us has reflective mentorships. We provide mentorship and we have our own reflective mentors outside of our collaboration. But when we meet together regularly, it's kind of both, right? Like sometimes we're discussing the logistics of scheduling and the logistics of how we're going to make things work. But very quickly and very often, our conversation goes back to the reflective piece of the therapeutic use of self and how can we bring, our best floor time approach to the clients, to the families, to optimize and maximize the child's developmental growth. So it really does inevitably turn back to the reflective piece, and how can we optimally support this dyad, this child, this parent, or whatever is warranted in that specific situation.
So Suzanne, can you describe what does a session look like?
We basically evaluate children and decide from each unique individual profile what will work best for not just that child, but the dynamic of the family. And it's so great to have 3 different professions here to be able to pick each other's brain constantly. So we feel like we're hitting a lot of different markers, but our sessions are really OT DIR floor time, or speech DIR floor time, or PT DIR floor time. So we're holding in our minds every unique individual profile of that child and what the goals are for that child in terms of their maximum participation, and then also all of their FEDCs and how to intertwine those things together, what constrictions are happening that we can help further the FEDCs.
But very often we'll do co-treats as well, myself and Susie, myself and Mary Beth, or the two of them, which really is a beautiful way of bringing in that unique floor time model with our own different lenses, the PT or the OT or the speech lens to it. And we find that it really changes the dynamic of the room. It brings down, it takes the focus off the child. We're kind of focusing on our own interaction where we're dealing with maybe some more heavier emotional themes, but we'll take the pressure off the child and maybe narrate our own experience or interact with the two of us. I mean, Mary Beth and I have really nice fights.
Spend a lot of time together.
Bickering, but allowing for that triangulation with the child because we know each other so well and we can.
And we've discussed how we're going to use our dynamic to grow the edges of the child that might be need a more exaggerated affect in a social situation, for example. Yeah, I want to piggyback on what Susie was saying. In our space, we don't, and you said it beautifully, but I just want to reiterate, we don't separate like this is a floor time session or this is an OT. We all three embody and use the FEDCs to guide our lens on the therapy. And so whether it's OT, PT, or speech, it is a floor time approach to that. And so when families come here, that is what they're doing. And we sort of explain like, if the child is working in language or academics are often sometimes a place where we would go, this is a child Manaz is going to work with first, or if there's a child who's, coordination and balance is really glaring to us as the portal of entry into support, that child might come to physical therapy or, for Susie, ocular motor or sensory processing piece, they might start there. But also, since we worked so collaboratively, to Susie's point, sometimes because we have different temperaments, sometimes we pick a family because they might need one of our temperaments to interact with them. And we do often do like 8 weeks of a physical therapy module and then go to 8 to 12 weeks of occupational therapy or something like that. But it's fluid and it's individualized to the profiles of the child and the parent and the family. Would you say?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And I think because we work so closely together, of course, we all stay in our own lane. I'm the speech, OT, and PT. But I think because we work so collaboratively, you will find a speech session that has a ton of movement in it. Because I understand the fact that we need to have this level of movement in order to reach those higher capacities. So I will be thinking about the ocular motor skills. I will be thinking about gaze stability. I will be thinking about the movement as well, of course, and always holding language there
as the goal.
And right. Same with OT. I have learned so much about language when I've been focused on the body so much that I've missed some of the language pieces that she's brought to my attention and then I can pick them out and say, hey, maybe this kid needs speech therapy, when in the past I might not have listened to all the words people were saying in the room and the sentence structure.
Development, right? Or even supporting it. So even while knowing that they're still getting speech or knowing that right now we're focusing on OT, but Susie will support the speech and the language piece of it as well.
So from everything that I've heard you say, it really does seem like you guys learned a lot of how to do what you're doing from working at a total approach, where Maud has this real collaborative clinic too with all the different pieces, and then reflecting on the cases later and giving each professional's inputs.
we often say how much we each highly value what Maud taught each of us. For me personally, I didn't even know about DIRFloortime until I was working with Maud in 2004.
A long time ago. She definitely laid the groundwork for reflective process like that. When you worked there, you were videotaped all the time and you just had to get over it. So I started there as a student which was great for me because I just didn't know any different. So it was a perfect place to start a career.
Yeah, and I mean, we always talk about how we need more of this everywhere, like the collaborative clinics with the different professions. I just want to put you guys on the spot here for a minute. If I brought him to your clinic, just for parents listening, and of course everybody's child is different and everybody's has a different profile, we emphasize that over and over. If I were bringing him into you guys and you have the information that they're working on dyspraxia and different kind of movements, what Sabrina O'Keefe is working on with him in his speech sessions is really developing the story and staying with a story.
You were to call and we would do a whole intake call, and then most likely we would have him meet Susie and I together as a first step. And we would spend a couple of hours together, and we would explain to you, we're going to be wanting to make him feel safe as the first and foremost thing when anyone comes to our clinic. Safety and an experience of feeling safety in our space is paramount to developing any sort of program. So that would be the first step. And Susie and I would probably take turns interacting with him and speaking with you about how he feels his challenges are, or where his strengths are. And, just we would explain who we are and what we do. And from there, we would really want to harness the kinesthetic body sense and really support the motor planning, motor learning, and motor development in any way that provides him agency and meaning, with the focus being in that body. I just did the second time of my affect mediated motor development course through ICDL, and the entirety of the 6 hours discusses ways that motor development can support affectual development and sensory, and vice versa. So we would use our floor time techniques. Really, we would use our affect, our intent, our collaboration.
And on the initial visit, we would focus on like trying to get a comprehensive evaluation. And sometimes it is
Baseline.
Vanaz. Sometimes she starts first. It just really
Right.
depends when they first get that phone call. Where are their goals? What are their challenges? What do they need? And then we kind of formulate how we're going to bring that client in, create the safe space.
True. Maybe we want to harness motor sequencing as a big goal, and then underpinning that would be his somatosensory system, the vestibular registration piece, how his ocular motors impacting visual system, taking in movement. We would be holding in mind the entirety of the individual profile, depending on which one of us.
Right. And I think as far as the language piece is concerned, like you said, following his lead. If Mario is where he's at, Mario is where we go.
Right.
Because we do recognize also that the language piece is very much mirroring the body. If the body is dyspraxic, oftentimes the language is also jumping from one idea to the other. So similar to what Sabrina's doing, holding that space for him so that he can kind of see his idea fully through, and then also deepen that idea as well.
This is where we would potentially do some co-treatment. We don't always start with co-treats. That is very dependent on, emotional sensory overwhelm, or, how much affect might be really beneficial to triangulate. Sometimes we start with one. Sometimes a co-treat is really, really beneficial in terms of depending on, it just depends on what the goals would be, what the growing, we try to support, scaffold at that, just stretch that rubber band a little bit in terms of body development and language development, and however we can get that to happen is pretty much where we'll go. Sometimes we don't get it right, and then we have the repair of the rupture that might occur, for sure.
Well, I'll say that he's a super fun kid and everyone loves playing with him because he's super sweet and funny. Having that experience of going to Maud's clinic numerous times, I mean, the first few times I was scared to death. I'm like, you actually think he's going to go in there and like put headphones on? Like, no, he's not going to keep them on. And then, oh, don't worry, all the parents say that. And I felt like, don't be condescending to me. Come on. Like, I know my kid, right? Sure enough, he kept the headphones on. I'm like, what? But I can imagine, just like us back then, very young children come to you after they just got diagnosed, and they might have no idea what's happening. They might be screaming and having a meltdown or whatever. So I like that you stressed the first thing you're doing is really giving them that sense of safety. Like, this is a fun place to be. You're okay here. We're not going to be like putting all these demands on you. We're going to be playing and having fun.
And that, yeah, go ahead.
And more so keep making sure that that is a safe place for parents as well. Because
Yes.
like you said, they've also come in with a brand new diagnosis. Their world has been shaken.
Mhm.
So knowing that this is a safe place, this is where your child is completely loved, respected, valued, and they know that that's true, because I think this is a tough world. Their children do not always feel that level of love and admiration,
Yeah.
and we, because we're floor timers, we do have that strength-based approach. We do see the beauty in their children. We do see
Right.
all the terrific things that their child's able to do, and that's what our focus is.
Mhm.
We are definitely strengths-based, so making sure that it is a safe place for us in our collaboration, the
Mhm.
parents, and then also the children that we're working with.
Mhm.
And I think, Daria, you hit the nail on the head again, that once that is foundational, then really like sudsing up the joy is our next thing that we kind of move toward. What brings this family and this child joy? And how do we harness that for all those amazing neurochemicals to bathe the brain for really setting the scene for this development? That's really, I mean, it's so important to all of us.
And it's so important to us working here. We have so much fun when we're here. I mean, there are days when I have to stop and think, like, I'm hiding under the table playing hide and seek. Like, this is my job. This is great. We're playing pickleball. We play, what else do we play? We play a lot of
games.
Foursquare.
So much.
A lot of word games,
A lot of word games, a lot of physical games. We three of us have a lot of fun here. So our joy is natural and it's real. So naturally the kids are feeling it. We've got the parents playing with us. It is a very fun space.
Right.
And another piece that this clinic, I don't know, it's a collaboration piece, is the parents meet each other, you know, in passing, or their kids end up playing together. And there's a lot of like shared happiness that or like connection that they've sharing with each other. And that's like just an added piece I don't think any of us ever planned on having, but it's just organic and lovely.
I'm glad you brought that up, because a lot of times it's like a doctor's office, like in, out, in, out, in, out.
We do have some families who are not ready to interact or meet other,
That's
you know,
true.
and that is just as respected and valued.
Of course.
These are really highly nuanced times and spaces when we're able, and I think it speaks to the communication and the trust that the three of us have in one another. And when the time is right, maybe to introduce or to have a space for that. But we do, pre-pandemic, we had more, social opportunities, and we plan to get back there in more intentional spaces, because our families really do love meeting one another and support one another. So creating a space for that is really another important part, for sure. Yeah.
You have the advantage of when you see other families with kids your age, so you have that in common. But then the other advantage is you might think it's a disadvantage if you see someone, like when I'm always talking about my 15-year-old and someone listening is like, yeah, but my kid's 2 or 3. What is that? That might feel like a disadvantage, but it's also an advantage, because then that parent has gone through so much that you are going to go through and has some wisdom to share and all of that. And that brings me to the whole part of the FEDCs, the functional, emotional, developmental capacities. And so every child that you're working with is going to vary. And, even in 2018, Maud had seen my son poking into the 5th capacity. And he's still, this many years later, working in capacity 4. It still has lots of constrictions, but he's definitely has a lot of 5 and 6, islands happening more and more. And it's it's just becoming more robust. All of that foundation is becoming more and more robust. But at the same time, some of it's slipping. Like I feel like the engagement is less since COVID, and the introduction of video games and lots of screen time is sort of making that engagement harder to maintain when he's just jumping from topic to topic. But, having that highest potential still moving up the spiral. So yeah, I imagine, part of DIR is meeting parents and children and everybody where they are developmentally.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think we also bring that through in the sessions that we have, particularly in the ones where we have older kids kind of reaching those higher capacities, but it's done in a way that is safety, in that very natural way of us interacting with plenty of joy, but all the while holding those higher capacities in the back of our mind. So even in our conversation, even in the activities that we might suggest, like a huge game of charades or a big game of Pictionary, there's always this concept in our minds of what we're holding of those higher capacities and where we're kind of guiding them through there. But because we've established this connection of safety and trust, we know that we can kind of push them on towards that direction. So it is something that is always present with us.
And it makes me think of something Dr. Gil Tippy said, and it resonated with me so much that I made him do a podcast with me about it. I think the podcast is called Floortime is also adolescent and adult led, meaning you're following the lead of whoever you're working with, whether they're a child, adolescent, or adult. And the reason we brought it up is he had said to me something about, I actually think it was in the DIR 310 functional emotional assessment scale class that Dr. Tippy talked about this, possibly when I sat on in that class however many years ago. He said that sometimes kids that are at higher capacities, he has to come in at a higher capacity to get engagement. So, that's why it's so important that people understand these as capacities and this like whole spiral that's constantly dynamic, because it's not a step like, let's get regulation.
That is exactly, that's what, remember when I said, yes.
Yeah.
That's what, when Manaz was talking, that's exactly what I was thinking. Sometimes we have to come in, I'm thinking of a little kiddo, his imagination was his portal. Now, if we had tried to start with, FEDCs 1 through 4, it would have been light years later than if we had joined in his imagination and stayed there.
Yes.
Same with his best friend.
Yeah.
Now his best friend, we have these 2 kids that are in a dyad now with OTPT. And it is, the conversations are beautiful.
I know.
Like the depth of these 2 7-year-olds talking about what's challenging for them. And,
Yes.
But they both
Life
started
experience. Mm-hmm.
with a profound difficulty to engage outside of their immediate visual space. And they had a lot of constrictions in extension and postural control and
Ocular
head
motor.
and body dissociation, gaze stability, ocular motor.
Yep.
But putting safety first and starting in these brilliant minds of, their figurine play, what was the way to go. Sometimes we start in capacities 5, 6, 7. And, it makes me think of the spiral that Gretchen Kamke and Amy Lewis used at the ICDL conference on regulation last year, that when you're growing in each capacity, we loop back and pick up FEDCs 1 through 6 when we're moving into 7. We pick, the spiral that you were just talking about.
And how your capacity for regulation increases
and
expands as you move through the capacities. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, beautiful.
You mentioned 2 7-year-olds with incredible imagination at the higher capacities.
Sometimes 7-year-olds, sometimes we have a couple of
really
4-year-olds.
happens organically. It's
Right.
like these kids come in, they see each other, they want to play together. And then in our self-reflective practice, we're like, this kid needs one other peer and a co-regulated space where they can really work on these higher challenges or differences. And so, it's organic.
And it just brings in, it adds to the richness of the session as well. And we come up with so many more naturally occurring challenges. Like there's more emotional themes that we're getting at, where they'll race together and one won and one lost, but now, so it becomes more realistic and natural for them to play, and it adds to the depth of the conversation when we're thinking about some of the adolescents that we work with.
Yes.
Even thinking about perspective taking. Did this other one understand what you said? Did they follow the way you said it? Do they need more clarification? It's so much richer in that real-time situation.
And this is making me think about our process together and the floor time model of reading one another's emotional signaling. It gets really nuanced, right? So we really do, like, in the earlier years or months of working together, I think it took us some time to really understand one another's. We talk about how emotional signaling is specific to each dyad, and sending and receiving emotional signals when we are intentionally, we will often try to send nonverbal, because oftentimes our friends that we're working with are highly speaking, yet have constrictions in this facial expression, sending and receiving gestures, sending and receiving prosody. So, in the earlier years, me, for example, would be sending these huge affectual signals. And Manaz would be like later, like, what are you even doing? Like, what is happening? Like, I see you over here using your affect in this way and over here. So it was a lot of communication, to really get to know one another and how we send and receive affectual signals. And through that process, I think we can really, really be effective when we're in sessions together, because we have that trust and collaboration and conversation.
And we completely know where the other one's coming from.
Usually.
Like if most often, yes, if we're like, oh my gosh, where is this something? Like, I know Mary Beth knows where it is. And I know that we're just playing for time and we're kind of problem solving.
Expanding latency, maybe.
Or there'll be some humor in it.
Even like saying, what is she feeling right now? Like me and a child trying to figure out what is Mary Beth feeling, or what is Manaz feeling right now in their face. Like, so we're both confused. So there's not a lot of pressure there. It's like, what's going on here? Let's figure it out together.
And we know to freeze frame, to give Susie and her kiddo long enough to be like,
peace, time.
What is that?
But we're also using our genuine affect because we're floor timers. So you can imagine the layers of conversations that we need to have, because we are each being genuine and also each being very thoughtful and holding in mind all the things. So it gets, when things get cooking, it's really amazing.
Yes.
And also takes a lot of communicating and collaborating. As well, you can imagine the nuances of some of the interactions that we have.
I'm going to refer listeners to the recent podcast with Sibylla Yannert on the following the child's emotional intent, which is what you guys were just talking about, and also the with Brooks Barrick, who's SLP, who also does a collaboration with an OT in their clinic in Kansas City, and she did it on gestural development and talking about the gesture stuff. So I'll point people back to those as well for more information about to fill in. And of course, the podcasts I've done with Mary Beth on physical therapy and floor time, and with Manaz on harnessing the, that storytelling and all of that piece that we can link back to. But what I, have wondered about, I know that one of the things that is for sure a difference and possibly a challenge in autistic kids, and certainly with young kids in general, like it's a developmental process, that whole theory of mind piece and the emotional signaling piece, it develops over time for sure. But a lot of people think that autistic people can't, read the emotional signals of others or whatever. And, since my diagnosis last year, I'm starting to think that actually a lot of times I can and I do read them. I just don't do anything about it. So I just don't act on it. Whereas neurotypical people might notice that and then respond accordingly. And that whole double empathy problem. I'm curious how you guys have noticed or listened to self-advocates in different experiences of the autistic experience or whatever. There's so many different opinions on all of that and experiences out there.
I think what we were talking about was slightly different than what you're alluding to. What we were talking about in that example is not necessarily being responsive to someone's emotions, but rather the way we use gestural communication, facial expressions, and prosody to just like send and receive communication turns. So like just the underpinning of communication being that, Greenspan talking about the FEDC2 sharing space, sharing joyful attention, and then opening and closing those circles of the pre-verbal communication for the purpose of communicating or for the purpose of. So I think what you're talking about, we do have, we have a lot of adolescent self-advocates who we get into these really deep conversations about, and again, this is so individualized, but some people experience challenges with sending or receiving emotional signals, and some people really understand so in-depth emotional signaling in others and choose not to respond, right? So I think the piece of this is individualized and always respected, with us coming from that curiosity of, are you sending and receiving for the purpose of communicating,
Yeah.
or where is the sending and receiving for the purpose of that care or concern or perspective taking, or is there an intention to be in an interaction at this point? Or, we've had one of our clients say, I really want to be supportive of my friend, and every time my friend sends me a signal, I'm kind of like, all right, like I don't know how to respond. So this person's coming to us, a 15-year-old, with the goal of trying to harness that for himself. And then we have some other advocates that say, go ahead.
I'm just thinking of someone who's 15.
Yeah.
She's uses a letter board to talk, and we've asked her multiple times, like, do you care about changing that? What is your goal? Do you even, does it matter? And she's like, nah, doesn't matter. I'm good. So that's just not a goal of ours for her,
Right.
And that's great. That's awesome that she told us that. We can work on other things. And
she has other goals. Yeah.
She does have other goals.
Yeah.
That's just not one of them. And
Right.
that's great. Glad she told us so we don't do it.
But we do, as developmental specialists, for everyone, want to create a space for the potential to develop these 3 areas of sending and receiving communication turns, right? If dyspraxia is impacting someone's capacity to gesture and they really want to communicate with their bodies, then that's something that we get really thoughtful and supportive of. On the
But
flip
also
side,
just recognizing the importance of that affective communication. We have so
Right.
many kiddos who come in here and highly verbal, strong vocabulary, really using some great semantic skills, but when putting it all together, really missing the underlying affective and emotional cueing that they're sending. I mean, we'll do a lot of sessions, or great parts of our sessions that are more silent, nonverbal, and affective. And this little guy goes, "What's wrong? You don't want to talk?" And not making sense of anything that we were sharing, or he'd be like, "Just tell me." So not really reading that affective cueing, but recognizing that 70% of what we're sharing is nonverbal. So really understanding that people are still communicating, even though they may not actually be using words, and being able to pick up on those cues as well, and recognizing that you are also sending those cues. So
Right. And understanding that even neurotypical people struggle with the cues, because you can never know what another person's thinking.
Right.
But I see what you're saying, like you really want to provide that foundation so that every child has access to whatever means they want to, and that agency to be able to relate, communicate, and think. And those are the pillars of the DIR model.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we're always thinking about, how each of these each person's differences, and we all have differences, will impact their capacity to exactly what you said, engage, relate, communicate, and move their bodies in a way that is their intention to provide them agency. Yeah, so holding in mind all of this is it's a lot, but we are often just able to support one another and support the families. And when we are able to work in collaboration, it is optimal, the most optimal.
Yeah.
I get so deep in my head about like the reciprocity of floor time for our families and our, that those circles that Dr. Greenspan talked about are so critical, that ever expanding arrow. And then I'm like, we're floor timing each other in this reciprocity. You can't, humans, having humans in relationship continue to expand. And that is the premise of how we work together.
Do you guys also do Zoom sessions, or is
Yeah.
everything in clinic in person?
So what we typically do is we have our clients that we see in clinic. Some people we see only virtually. And that works for some kids and families. But what we really make a point to do is meet with the families on Zoom. Sometimes when there's a teenager or a young adult involved, we meet with them also, but sometimes just with the family, with these younger kiddos, to really take that time, reflect on how they're feeling, share some video of our sessions with them, parent coach during that. And I think that is more valuable sometimes than our actual in-person sessions, because it just really gives us a moment to stop and think about the progress and be really strength-based to these parents that are in the trenches all day long, and kind of reframe some things that we're seeing from a positive.
And I think also the other thing we're doing, because our sessions are so uniquely floor time, they can look a little bit confusing. A parent might wonder why Mary Beth and I are talking about or sharing a story. So those Zooms give us a chance to say we're modeling a narrative, we're modeling a personal narrative, and we're fishing for that individual to come and share theirs. It's an opportunity for the parent to also model their narrative and talk about a struggle that they've had. So, and we've said this at the outside, but it can be a little bit confusing for the parent. Like, why are we playing hide and seek?
Yeah.
Why are we actually playing pickleball? Like, what is it? Why is a speech therapist playing pickleball? Right. So it can be a little bit confusing, and it gives us that time to unpack the whole session and multiple sessions and why we're doing what we're doing, just to make sure that there's this constant collaboration and discussion.
Trust build, hear what parents are reflecting on, hear how over time sharing their own experiences, reflecting on their own emotions when they're engaged in play. It becomes a real feed forward system when we take the space to do both in person and then those step back, reflect sessions.
It's great. It's so valuable for parents, because I know if you want to get any kind of follow through at home as well, like not like Maud talks about, she doesn't want to be the parents to be the therapist, but just like you said, like when she has explained stuff to me and says, oh, when you're at home, when you're playing, like what you can do is help your child visualize by talking about what you did that day, so it's fresh in his mind. And remember, we went to the museum, what did that whatever look like again, or whatever, and getting them to play it out. And so when the parents have those tips of what they can do at home, and they have that rationale for why and how it carried over from there, it really helps give them more bang for their buck, let's say. Well, I am so happy to have brought this topic because it really is what Dr. Greenspan envisioned when he described all of this stuff in his radio shows or in his books, having this collaborative approach where all of the therapies or support that people are getting, everybody's on the same page. And it's, like he said, working like an orchestra as all of these sensory motor affective systems develop together. So thank you so much for sharing your experiences at Baby Steps. And if people are interested in finding more, I have the link to the clinic at the blog post at affectautism.com. Thank you so much, Suzanne, Manaz, and Mary Beth.
Thank
Thank
you
you,
so
Daria.
much.
Thank you for listening. This episode of We Chose Play was made possible with the generous financial support of Affect Autism's members at patreon.com/affectautism and of the International Council on Development and Learning, ICDL.com. If you liked this episode, please share it with someone, like and subscribe, sign up for the newsletter at affectautism.com, and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, or Instagram. Until next time, here's to choosing play and experiencing joy every day. Affect Autism, in its 10th year of providing free supportive content for your DIR journey. Want more? Consider joining the DIR Parent Network. Join a community of like-minded parents where we can support, learn, and thrive together. For more information, check out the parent menu at icdl.com or the events menu at affectautism.com.